Midvale was the kind of small American town where everyone knew your name and your business, a place where the streets stayed quiet and the days rolled by with predictable rhythm. Officer Mark Johnson patrolled those streets with a swagger that set him apart from the rest of the force. At 45, he'd been with the Midvale Police Department for nearly 2 decades, long enough to believe his badge gave him a special kind of license, one that let him bend rules others followed without question. Mark was stubborn, quick to act, and convinced his instincts trumped protocol. His colleagues admired his decisiveness, even if they whispered about his arrogance behind closed doors. But on one bright September morning, Mark's path was about to collide with a force he couldn't outmaneuver. Word had spread through Midvale like wildfire. Senator Wayne Carter, a respected figure known for his steady hand and honest words, was coming to town. At 62, Carter had built a reputation as a man who spoke truth and delivered results, a rare breed in Washington. He was visiting to unveil a plan for revitalizing small towns like Midvale. New jobs, better infrastructure, a lifeline for a community feeling the pinch of change. The townsfolk buzzed with anticipation, tidying storefronts and speculating about what the senator's visit might mean. For Mark, though, the news sparked something different, a surge of pride mixed with ambition. He saw Carter's arrival as a stage to flex his own authority, a chance to prove he was more than just a small-town cop. Mark hatched a plan as he sipped his coffee that morning, the steam curling around his weathered face. He wouldn't just keep order like his chief had instructed. He'd make a move no one saw coming. In his mind, a senator was just another suit, someone he could challenge to show Midvale who really ran things. Rules were for rookies, he told himself. Real power came from guts. He imagined the townsfolk talking about it for years. Remember when Mark Johnson stood up to that big-shot senator? The thought fueled him as he strapped on his holster and headed out, ignoring the quiet voice in his gut that warned him to reconsider. The town square was alive by mid-morning, a modest crowd gathering under a clear blue sky. Kids waved tiny American flags and old-timers swapped stories on benches as they waited for Carter's motorcade. Mark moved through the scene with purpose, his boots clicking against the pavement, his eyes scanning for the perfect moment. He'd decided to intercept the senator's arrival, maybe demand a word, question his plans, anything to assert himself. He didn't care that his superiors had told him to stay back and manage traffic. In his world, authority was earned through action, not orders. As the black SUVs rolled into view, the crowd's chatter rose to a hum. Mark positioned himself near the edge of the square, close enough to step forward when the moment felt right. He adjusted his sunglasses, his chest puffed out, picturing the senator's surprise when a local cop dared to break protocol. What Mark didn't see, what he couldn't see, was the web tightening around him. Senator Carter's team wasn't just a handful of aides. It included a discreet security detail, seasoned pros who'd dealt with bigger threats than a small-town officer with a chip on his shoulder. And they'd done their homework. Years back, Mark had cut a corner he thought no one would notice. A routine stop had turned messy. Property damaged, a complaint buried under paperwork he'd lost. It wasn't corruption, not exactly, but it was sloppy, reckless, the kind of mistake that could unravel a career if anyone cared to look. No one had, until now. Carter's investigator, a meticulous woman named Linda Hayes, had dug into Midvale's police records ahead of the visit, standard procedure for a high-profile event. She'd found the file, yellowed and forgotten, and flagged it to the team. They'd kept it quiet, watching to see if Mark would stay in line. But as he edged closer to the motorcade, they knew he wouldn't. The senator stepped out of his vehicle, tall and composed, his gray suit catching the sunlight. The crowd clapped politely, and Carter raised a hand in acknowledgement, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating off Mark. That's when Mark made his move. He strode forward, ignoring the traffic cones, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Senator Carter, a word, if you don't mind." Heads swiveled. A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Carter paused, turning with a measured look while his security team stiffened. Mark planted himself a few feet away, hands on his hips. "I've got some questions about these big plans of yours," he said, his tone sharp. "Midvale's my town. I deserve to know what you're really up to." The square went quiet, the weight of Mark's words hanging in the air. Carter's eyes narrowed slightly, but before he could respond, two plainclothes officers from the senator's detail stepped in. "Sir, back off," one said, his voice low but firm. Mark smirked, undeterred. "I'm the law here," he shot back. "I don't take orders from you." That's when it unraveled. The second officer, a broad man with a clipboard, didn't hesitate. "Officer Mark Johnson?" he asked, his tone clipped. Mark blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah, that's me. What's it to you?" "We've got a problem," the officer said, pulling a folded sheet from his pocket. "Step aside." Before Mark could argue, they guided him away from the crowd, their movements swift and practiced. The townsfolk watched, confused, as Mark's bravado faltered. Behind the kiosk, the officer laid it out. "We've got a record of an incident. September 12, 2018. Property damage, falsified report. You want to explain?" Mark's stomach dropped. "That's old news," he stammered. "Cleared up years ago." "Not according to this," the officer replied, holding up the file. "And not when you're pulling stunts like this in front of a U.S. senator." The crowd didn't hear the exchange, but they saw Mark's shoulders slump, the fight draining out of him. Carter resumed his walk to the podium, unfazed, while the security team escorted Mark to a waiting patrol car, not his own. Word spread fast. Officer Johnson had stepped out of line and gotten caught. By noon, his badge was in question, and the town buzzed with disbelief. That afternoon, Midvale's quiet streets carried a new story. Mark sat in a holding room at the station, staring at the wall as his career crumbled. The senator's team had handed the file to local authorities, who couldn't ignore it now that it was public. Chief Daniels, a gruff man who'd tolerated Mark's antics too long, shook his head when he saw the evidence. "You thought you were untouchable," he said, tossing the report on the desk. "You were wrong." Mark didn't argue. The pride that had fueled him that morning was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. He'd wanted to be a big fish in Midvale's small pond, but he'd misjudged the current. The senator's speech went on without a hitch. Talk of jobs, roads, a future Midvale could believe in. Carter didn't mention the incident, didn't need to. His team had handled it, and the message was clear. No one was above the law, not even a cop with a grudge. By evening, the town had shifted. Kids still waved their flags, but the whispers were about Mark. How he'd overreached, how justice had struck like lightning. The investigation widened, pulling up more of his shortcuts. A warning ignored here, a favor covered up there. Each one a brick in the wall he'd built, now collapsing around him. He was suspended pending a hearing, his name no longer a boast but a cautionary tale. Senator Carter left Midvale that night, his mission intact, his reputation bolstered by the quiet efficiency of his team. At the station, Mark faced the chief one last time. "I just wanted to matter," he muttered, his voice brittle. Daniels sighed. "You mattered, Mark. You just didn't see how." Weeks later, Midvale settled into a new normal. The senator's promises took root, construction crews arrived, storefronts reopened, and the town felt a flicker of hope. Mark's desk stayed empty, his locker cleared out. Some pitied him, others didn't, but all agreed on one thing. He'd crossed a line and paid the price. For the people of Midvale, the lesson lingered. Power wasn't a badge or a bold move, it was trust, earned through humility and respect. Mark had chased the former and lost the latter, a reminder etched into the town's memory. Justice hadn't just come for him, it had come for them all, a quiet promise that no one could outrun the rules forever. One reckless step brought justice swift and sure. This story reminds us that true power lies in humility, not pride. If Mark's fall spoke to you, give this video a like to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more tales that teach us life's big lessons. What would you do if pride clouded your judgment? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear. Until next time, keep this in mind. No one outruns the truth.